Hey, this is the TotallyHooked.net podcast. This is Frank Howard, and today we're going to be talking about job security and managing information systems. As some people know, I finished my MBA 2 years ago, and one of the most important lessons I learned in my management of information systems class was job security and how it works. And there was 4 lessons in particular that I think are so important. It's important to just take an entire podcast and talk about it. So we're going to talk about that. And of course, there's a lot of updates to the TotallyHooked.net website. So be sure to subscribe on iTunes and keep things going, keep this going. So let's get started with the music. And we're back. This is the TotallyHooked.net podcast. I'm Frank Howard, your host. And today we're going to be talking about job security and managing information systems, which is a really, really important thing to talk about in today's economy, today's job market, just overall useful things. Now, get your brain ready to start learning some stuff. And with that, let's learn what we've done on all of our podcasts. Before we get started, let's start with the word of the day. Today's word of the day is incontrovertible. Incontrovertible, which means not open to question, indisputable. Incontrovertible means indisputable. Here's incontrovertible used in a sentence. The manager presented the clerk's time card as incontrovertible evidence that the employee had been late for work all 5 days the previous week. The manager presented the clerk's time card as incontrovertible evidence that the employee had been late for work all 5 days the previous week. You know, that is a perfect sentence. I like to read these sentences just on the fly, and it's so ironic that today we're going to be talking about job security, and that's just the perfect sentence there, because that, I think without question, there is indisputable evidence, incontrovertible evidence that, not showing up to work, that's definitely a way to get fired. And with that, let's get started talking about job security. How do we understand job security? What is job security, and what can we do to make ourselves so valuable, so needed that we can continue to add value for the extended period of time? Well, first off, I think we should speak to some of the benefits. I mean, we can imagine there's a lot of benefits to having job security. For me, when I first started getting job security, I know that I was able to, I think I was just sleeping better, I was just getting things done, just knowing that everything is okay. Anyway, we can go on to those things in a bit. I think what's far more important is to go over the core components that I talked about in the beginning and the 4 most important things that I learned. And I got this from business school, actually. I was working on my MBA, and in one of my classes, you could take management of information systems. And that is a growing field, managing information systems. That's whether it's databases, IT, networks, network security, information systems is something that's going to be around for a while. So this is sort of spoken from the perspective of maybe an IT manager or more like a project manager with information systems background, or somebody. When I'm about to get into these 4 key components, and it's just so universal. Honestly, I could see this applying if you're like, I think I could argue, we'll argue it later, if you're a lawyer or if you're an accountant or if you're starting your own business. All these things, I think, come into play. And the biggest insight from this whole class that I got, and we went into deep, we developed databases through Access, and we did all these highly technical functions, but it really comes down to what I learned in the first chapter. And I think this is such universal information that it's good. And it starts with something, and I want to give credit to 2 individuals. First, the the individual who wrote the book, which was David M. Kronk, and I'll put the link inside the description, but it's David M. Kroenke, and that was the manual we used for our Management of Information Systems book. It's the book is called Experiencing MIS. Experiencing MIS. M is in management, I is in information, and S is in systems. That's the book where this came from, and that was the author of the book. And second, Robert Reich, who, if people remember, I think it was during the Clinton era, Robert Reich was the Secretary of Labor during the Clinton era, and he discussed four interesting things. Basically, non-routine cognitive skills is what these four things are. And it's something that we need to develop in order to have more job security. Strong, non-routine cognitive skills. In other words, things are becoming more and more global than ever. And if to the degree that you have a job that could be routinely made or is very routine, is kind of puts that on the chopping block for what we don't want, which is non-security. If we're going for security, what we need to be shifting ourselves into and considering is this idea of developing strong, non-routine cognitive skills. So what are strong, non-routine cognitive skills? Here are the four major components. Number one, abstract reasoning. Number two, systems thinking. Number three, collaboration. And number four, the ability to experiment. Now let's go over each of these one by one, and then we'll go over each one by one deeper. So just really quick, abstract reasoning. What is abstract reasoning? It's the ability to make and manipulate models. We're going to visit this even deeper. Number two, what is systems thinking? Systems thinking is the ability to model the components of the system, to connect the inputs and outputs among those components into a sensible whole that reflects the structure and dynamics of the phenomenon observed. That sounds really technical, but we're going to go into that as well. Number three, collaboration. Collaboration is the activity of two or more people working together to achieve a common goal, result, or work product. And finally, number four, we'll be going to is the ability to experiment. Experimentation is making a reasoned analysis of an opportunity, envisioning potential solutions, evaluating those possibilities, and developing the most promising ones consistent with the resources you have. So those were the four major components to non-routine cognitive skills, and these are things that will lead us to job security and having more of the skills we need, because frankly, I've thought about all four of those a lot over the years, and they are all things that we certainly can adapt and build on. And we're going to go into each one by one. So first, abstraction, abstract reasoning. What is abstract reasoning? Okay, well, let's go over this. I know this is a really smart audience. I just want to say, I'm just assuming and there's people out there that are book smart, that are really PhD smart, and they're probably listening to this. There might be medical doctors listening to this. There might be, but there's also, in my experience and in my life, I've met a lot of people that are just experience smart. And, they say street smart, but I think I think that there's intelligent people. I've met a lot of incredibly smart people, and this applies to whether you're, super logical smart, or whether you're physically smart, or whether you're emotionally smart. All those things apply here. So let's start with abstract reasoning. Abstract reasoning sounds complicated, but it's just the ability to make and manipulate models, which that sounds like make and manipulate models. Sort of like, we'll get like, I had to wrap my head around this, especially at the beginning of business school. Eventually we went into designing like financial models, or in operations management, different case scenarios through like spreadsheets. And there's just one thing, if you ever like start learning a little bit more about business, what is so cheap, I think, not cheap, a very effective thing to do is like building a spreadsheet, or just basically building a model of whatever it is you want to do. In other words, what you can do is, instead of having to like put what's it called? Like, say you're building a building and you try to put like steel deep into the ground, and you put cement in there, and then you put like wood on. I don't know, however a building works, but basically, like, what if you could just model that and simulate the model before you even drop any cement down? Why is that important? Because when you build a model, you can simulate other models, and you can look at other models that other people have developed. And in a lot of ways, you can basically avoid reinventing the wheel, as they say, because a lot of people get attached to their ideas. And if you're not able to think abstract or think in terms of models, you won't be able to quickly and effectively accomplish things. If somebody else has already developed the world's greatest way of accomplishing something, why not use what they have, so that then you can take your creative abilities and make something even better? This is just me speaking at this point, but the idea here is that you just construct models on your own. You know, your ability to make a model of something. You know, another way to think of this is maybe like a model airplane. You know, we take a model of the airplane, and it's sort of modeling what a highly sophisticated aircraft can do. So that's what we're doing when we're modeling. I know I've heard this, and now I'm going to digress a little bit away from what I learned in school to what I've just learned from experience and from what I've learned from listening to people like Tony Robbins, because in the neuro-linguistic programming field, Tony Robbins is always credited as a modeler. And I always like that idea of what he would do is take somebody who is like an expert in their field and break down the things that make that expert an expert, the core components, because oftentimes it's only a percentage of everything else. All the other stuff that we're wasting our time on, a lot of people think about in different areas, but if you just focus on the one things, like the top 3 to 5 things that are most important to that, you can get a lot of leverage by doing that. That's kind of how I saw modeling, this idea of modeling, taking a model and running it through experiments before actually doing it. And you see modeling playing itself out with everything that you're learning, with everything that has been taught. I know with IT, information systems, modeling is really important. Having a project manual available to show what, you know, things that have worked, things that have not worked in the past. So that's modeling, and we may come back more to that as this discussion continues. Number 2, systems thinking. And this is where systems thinking is where we take the models. It's the ability to model the components of the system, to connect the inputs and outputs among those components into a sensible whole that reflects the structure and dynamics of the phenomenon observed. That sounds really complicated, but earlier than that, they used a example of walking into a grocery store and picking up if you pick up fruit or a can of beans or something, and how, when you're holding that can of beans, do you understand how the United States immigration policy is related with that can of beans? That's kind of how systems thinking works, because there's multiple systems, multiple stakeholders. That can of beans might reflect the operations and the supply chain that it took to deliver the beans to your store. The way that the United States has instituted policy to allow a globalized supply chain can have an effect on that. If you didn't understand all the components that went into this, then you'll have a difficulty with any system. And something I think I remember talking about. So this even asks in this book, do you know why one of the major beneficiaries of YouTube is Cisco Systems? That's another thing. You wouldn't, if you go onto YouTube, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't know that Cisco Systems has a major part, is a major player within YouTube. Why is that? Well, the networks, what's going on behind the scene is creating the connections between all the things that are happening, and by knowing that underneath the hood, so to speak, there's a lot of systems going on, components within the system that are working, that helps us think about how everything is kind of interrelated into, like they say, a sensible whole. It's kind of being able to get the 20,000 foot view, the larger roadmap, the strategic overviews, and this is just me speaking the way I understand it. Because by getting the larger picture of things, I know in the scientific community, I've known several scientists that are incredibly technical people. They're stuck in minutia. I've known some in their fields, their respective fields, they've spent 20 years studying one specific area of science, and they've published these documents on it. And how that interrelates, maybe we can all think about this. How does the impact of that science relate with the end user? How is the impact of case studies done by a scientist? Like, let's say a scientist comes out with a new technology, and the government is interested in purchasing the technology. How does that interplay? Being able to think in terms of systems, and I like to try to think almost everything is sort of a system in a way. If taking a systematic approach, seeing the interworkings of everything is sort of, I think, a good way of thinking. So this idea of systems thinking is really key. And I just thought it was interesting that, at the title of this podcast and the name of this book ends, The Management of Information Systems. So there's a system, whatever information, if you're in the IT field, whatever information, whatever databases you might be managing, that's an entire system. Whatever your database is, a system that works with other systems. Maybe there's different stakeholders. Maybe there's different people that you're working with. And understanding how your system works and how systems in general work is something that is incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And most importantly, it's a non-routine way of thinking and a non-routine way of looking at it. And it's going to make it a lot more difficult to be outsourced and a lot more difficult to be replicated. So that's a really important aspect. And to get more information about systems thinking, I know I've read a lot of, I was first introduced to systems thinking, I think about 5 years ago. And it was it was more from the philosophy perspective. It was Ken Wilber that first introduced talking about systems thinking. And he was talking from the behavioral psychology perspective of human development, to understand human development in terms of systems. Like as a human develops, we have our survival needs, and then we go into needs like social needs, and then, different spiritual needs. And it's just everything, our development, we can develop as a system spiritually, financially, relationally, everything personally there's a system that's been tested over time, and we can use that kind of looking at the roadmap, at the big picture, at how everything is sort of interconnected. Like even in biology, I'm going on and on here a little bit about systems thinking, but I see it play out in so many fields and so many industries. But like I don't know much about it, but like the nervous system, the nervous system, the central nervous system is an entire interplay of, complex things. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I notice it's like when you first learn something, you know how they say, like, when you first learn something, you start seeing it everywhere. Like you start researching a certain car and you'll see that car everywhere, or you start thinking about something and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's everywhere. Well, like when I first started to learn about systems thinking, I realized, wow, everything is a system. So just systems thinking and thinking about how the databases that people are managing, the email that you're sending, the cell phone that you're talking on, the applications that you're using, those are all part of larger systems that are coordinating and interacting with each other. And the better you can get that, both the 5-foot view and the 40,000-foot view and beyond, is the degree that you can, basically strategically empower yourself. So that's systems thinking. And, something else to think about is the comparison of different systems. If one system has operations that are more effective than other systems, are you going to be able to apply different systems thinking techniques to use a more effective system? I know in information technology it's really important. So number 3, this one is collaboration. And although we all know about collaboration, this one was my personal favorite when I did a lot of work with Toastmasters International. And Toastmasters International, if anybody doesn't know, it's a public speaking group where you usually meet about once a week. And it's global. It's around. Toastmasters is great. Like, I would do the research and find out if you really want to take job security to the next level and learn more about collaboration as we go into this discussion of collaboration, because we're going to talk a lot more about the collaboration. But I just want to say Toastmasters is all action. It's all action and less do. I remember taking speech classes in college, and it was very academic, and we learned a lot. And I think we only spoke like 2 or 3 times. But I can almost guarantee you the very first meeting you go to and every meeting after that at Toastmasters, you will speak. You will get out of your comfort zone and you'll talk. And the great thing about that is you're going to be in front of people that have all been where you've been, and they're going to be very positive. And I've never been to a meeting where there has been any difficulties or anything like that. Maybe some of the advanced classes where there's actually advanced Toastmasters groups, and that's with professional speakers, people who can professionally, people who get paid to evaluate speeches. And I know in the Washington, D.C. area, Toastmasters is so huge, there actually are professional speakers that have gotten paid, and they've done paid speeches, and they've gotten paid to give people feedback, which leads into this whole discussion of collaboration. We'll use this Toastmasters analogy more as we talk about collaboration. So here's the definition of collaboration. And these are all non-routine activities that can help leverage ourselves to keep job security. Collaboration is the activity of 2 or more people working together to achieve a common goal, result, or work product. I don't know if I even have to. It almost goes without saying that in every field out there today, even this in the telework, work from home environment, collaboration, working with 2 or more people is critical. That's just the human element. The human element is still really important, no matter how much we technologize everything. technologize. I'm just making up words right here. We still need the ability to collaborate with other people. And I think some of the things to think about is being candid with other people. Being candid, a lot of times, like a lot of people like to say honest, but candid is sometimes saying the things that just need to be said, but that aren't offensive. And I'll just read what this wonderful book that I keep quoting from, MIS. This first chapter is very valuable. Is surveys indicate that the single most important skill for effective collaboration is to give and receive feedback. So the single most important skill for collaboration, if you want to develop that collaboration, is to give and receive feedback. What is feedback? Feedback gives us a way to learn what we're doing wrong. And that goes back to what I'm saying about why I don't mean to be selling this Toastmasters so much, but I'd never seen anywhere that quickly, a organization that so quickly offers people feedback. And by feedback, I mean every speech that is spoken at a Toastmasters meeting involves feedback. So if you're usually a typical meeting has 3 speakers and 3 evaluators. So if you're not speaking that week, you might have to be an evaluator. And that's where your critical feedback skills through collaboration are so important. So maybe you might be able to give good speeches, but arguably a very, very important skill is the ability to give effective critical feedback. So somebody stands up there and they give a speech. How are you going to do it? You know, a lot of times people talk about the sandwich technique. You know, Mr. Frank Howard, you had a lot of great stage presence here. I like the way you maintained eye contact with people. Sometimes I think to take a good speech and make it better, what you can do is have more stage presence, take up more room. Understand that the people that are listening are not only taking in the words that you're saying, but the way that you're saying the words. So don't rush into everything you're saying. Slow down and speak from the heart. Again, these are just a few techniques in order to make a good speech into a great speech. So right there was a typical, evaluation. Not, typically the evaluations are about 1 to 2 minutes, but that's the kind of feedback that people need, because feedback is something, it's so rare, and it's really the only way that I can imagine that we can get better. Because unless you're receiving feedback in the real world for things that you're testing, you're never going to know if what you're doing is being successful or not being successful. And the effective thing about collaboration in terms of Toastmasters is it kind of forces you into an uncomfortable or unknown environment, meaning you don't know what the outcome's going to be. Perhaps you planned the speech. And I remember when I was first starting out, I had spent so much time thinking about different things that would happen that never happened. And then I realized just getting up there and getting my points across is more important, not thinking too much. And then you would think too hard about things. And then if things didn't go the way you thought they would go, you spend the rest of the speech kind of defending yourself, when instead of defending yourself, you should be focusing on the message. And I think, and this is just me, my opinion as a distinguished Toastmaster, what I found was 3 points. This is what I always recommend to people. 3 points. If you're going to give a speech that's like a 5-minute speech, I could even see this going on into an hour speech. This podcast, in a way, is testament to that. This is a longer speech, mostly for 5-minute speeches. I would say 3 points. Today, what we're doing is we're giving 4 points. And the reason we're giving 4 points is, first off, the fewer points, the easier it is to understand. I'm not sitting here going so deep into each one of these things one by one that it's too complicated. And if I were to talk about one of these for an extended period of time, let's say collaboration, because you could do an entire podcast on collaboration. I would try to just have a few components, so 3 or 4 basic core ideas. And again, this is basic. It's also good for people who are advanced, but this is just generally good, and it's good to talk about. You say what you're going to say at the intro, you say it, and then at the closing, you say it again, and you close. You close yourself, and you don't keep going. I've seen so many people when they first give speeches, they just keep talking. They don't know how to end the speech. End the speech. Just stop. Sometimes not saying anymore. And, I'm thinking about the 48 laws of power. I think one of those laws is never say any more than you need to, or something to paraphrase that. I know that the 48 laws of power has been judged as kind of a Machiavellian way of looking at things, but there are some interesting, realistic insights to be taken from that. And one of those is, you're going to say exactly what you need to say. Now, to get back on track, giving and receiving critical feedback. Now, that was the first aspect I said, was to give critical feedback. And I think a lot of people, especially people who've taken the Myers-Briggs, who are strong J's, you're going to be, you're all over that giving feedback. But how good are you at receiving feedback? And that was a huge, huge thing for me when I was going through Toastmasters. Can you handle feedback? Can you handle somebody giving you feedback, looking at them, accepting it, and appreciating their critical feedback, and not get so defensive over it and not defend yourself? I'm sort of thinking about these scientists I've seen kind of recently. Like I was at a conference, and basically these scientists, they were like going back and forth on I'm sure the whole audience was like, gosh, come on, man. It's important, but you guys can talk about this on your own time. We're all sitting here witnessing this. Just understand and accept that this is what other people think. And for me, again, when we talk about public speaking, it's often about giving speeches, but gosh, I'll be honest. The biggest insights I learned was from the listening. Because when you're giving a speech, you need to be aware of your audience. You need to be looking at the things that they're doing. And I personally recommend audience interaction. Like if you can get feedback from your audience, you'll learn, and they'll be more engaged. And then you can tweak what you're training them onto things that are more valuable to them. So what I would say is receiving feedback is so important. If somebody gives you feedback, that is a gift. In my opinion, that's a gift. That's how I always saw that. I always saw that somebody's giving me something. Somebody, especially when I started to get feedback from professional speakers, and I started to get feedback from people who had been in Toastmasters for many, many years. That is so. This is another plug for Toastmasters. I don't care, whatever. It's such a, you pay such a small fee. I think every 6 months it's like $23. But you couldn't pay to meet these people like in their personal lives. Like there were PhDs in several of my clubs. There are people who are professionals. They're doing a service to you by giving them feedback. And their time, they get paid so much more than what their time is worth. And they're doing it as a service to improve the community and to improve themselves. So when somebody gives you feedback, especially at that level, I recommend you taking it and not getting defensive, not trying to judge back, but really just appreciating that, wow, this one insight. This is what it's all about. This is why I'm here. Because feedback, as we said, is the only way you're going to get better. We can all give speeches to our family members and they're going to love us, but getting real feedback from the real world, from real professionals, you can't compare that to anything else. So those are my thoughts on collaboration, on working with 2 or more people. It goes a lot deeper than that. Like just thinking about this manual, I was thinking about some other things I remember from organizational behavior, and it doesn't talk about this, but power dynamics in an organization are real. You know what I mean? Like there's people, there's stakeholders, there's people who have, on the surface, they might be out there to help you, but it's not always the case. And even today in 2015, especially in the federal government, but as well as in the private industry, you still have to be aware of the power dynamics that are at play in the workforce. And I'll kind of leave it at that, but also keeping in mind things that we've discussed in terms of collaboration. So here we are finally to the fourth non-routine skill that basically we've been discussing. That is the ability to experiment. And we need to think about this the right way, because this one is a little bit different. A lot of people, I think, well, what I imagine the negative part to this would be, experiment, what does that mean? Am I going to go crazy and jump around and just do crazy stuff? Because that's just not, that's not professional. No, you're not going to go jump around doing crazy stuff unless you need to jump around and do crazy stuff in order to evolve and make yourself better. I'm going to digress here for a second. Like, I went through an experimentation phase. I remember when I was first learning the ukulele, and I needed to know what it felt like to play the ukulele in front of just random people. So there was like 3 or 4 weekends. I was out in Arlington County and around the Washington, D.C. area. I was just outside playing the ukulele. I needed to know what that felt like to get to get past that social pressure. I needed to force myself to not care what other people thought, and I'm just going to sit here and present that to everybody. So that was I think a really positive experimentation that resulted in increased confidence for me. So I wouldn't underestimate the power of even radical experimentation to a degree. There's been some TED Talks about this. I think there was a video, I think a YouTube video, where it showed like how things go viral, and there was a guy dancing, and then all of a sudden like 5 or 6 people started dancing, and then next thing you know, it looked like one of those Gangnam style YouTube videos where you just see one guy dancing, and then in the next shot everybody's dancing. Like, that's kind of how it works. I think as leaders, which in terms of experimentation is be the guy asking the questions. Like, have you ever been to like a conference or something and then seen one guy ask a question, and then after that guy asks a question, everyone else starts to ask the question? Be that person that's asking the question. That is valuable. People notice that kind of stuff. Okay. So here's the definition of experimentation. Experimentation is making a reasoned analysis of an opportunity, envisioning potential solutions, evaluating those possibilities, and developing the most promising ones consistent with the resources you have, meaning calculated risks. Because I think people get stifled pretty easily. What happens is if you're working with a lot of databases, you got a lot on your plate, and you see everything is so complicated. Like, let's say it's your first day on a job and you're working with an entirely new database. Like, are you the kind of person where you have to feel like, I need to read the entire manual from front to back, that 300-page technical manual, to get everything? Or do you just, sometimes you can just start doing test searches with it. Or what I like to do, and this isn't necessarily a recommendation, but what I like to do is just ask what are the few primary uses of this application. Just ask somebody what, like in your job, what's the most important thing? Like, what's your typical day like, or something like that. Either that, or I just try to find what the key functions are of that, and then just go with it. A lot of people, it's harder to say now, because I deal with mostly people who are comfortable with technology, but let's be honest, there's people, I can't assume that there are people out there that are not comfortable operating technology. Technology is a very scary thing for a lot of people. Technology, I guess there's a reason that those technology movies like Terminator are so popular, because We're afraid of things that we don't know or that we don't understand. And in order to evolve past that, we need that ability to experiment. And that's, I think, what the author means and what Robert Reich meant when that's partially what he meant when he's talking about the ability to experiment. Being okay with going into the unknown. Being all right with, and, just testing things out. Toastmasters is another good example. In fact, I can see Toastmasters relating with all four of these, actually. But in terms of the ability to experiment, I remember doing some speeches just to see what kind of reactions I would get, especially from, I think the hardest speeches to give, the hardest manual to deliver from that Toastmasters manual was the humorous speaking manual. Because laughing, almost by definition, something that's funny requires an element of surprise in it. And you have to do something that's kind of unexpected. So if you making somebody laugh is almost an uncontrollable behavior. That's why it's such an important skill set. And in order to get to the ability to where you can make people laugh, you might have to experiment with 5 or 10 or 100 different ideas before you develop that high leverage idea that's going to make people laugh. You might have to experiment saying things. You might have to experiment going from one spectrum of humor to an entirely different spectrum of humor until you find your voice. So when, to keep this public speaking analogy, experimentation is very powerful. It's going into that, okay, next week you have to give a 5-minute speech, and it has to be about your vocal variety. So what kind of ways are you going to experiment on your vocal variety? Are you going to experiment speaking really loud and high-pitched? Or are you going to experiment speaking low and very masculine? Are you going to experiment with things that are personal to you? Some of the best speeches that I've been told are when the speaker shows a sense of vulnerability. And that's why Toastmasters, again, is such a great thing, because it's not your workplace. You could just go up there and start crying about something that happened to you back in the day, and that's just you experimenting what it feels like. And I can't tell you enough how valuable that is, because you might have things in your life. I had things in my life that I felt like I just had to tell somebody, or I had to get out there, not just to my family, not just to my friends, but to just total strangers. And I might be weird, like by thinking about that. Like when I say that versus when I think it, it's a lot different. But to go in front of a big group and say things that are really deeply vulnerable to you, it's not a very easy thing to do. And once you get over that hump, and once you've done it, you realize, okay, I'm still alive. I experimented with this, and this was the result, and this is what other people thought, and this is good. This is because I'm still alive. So, what does this say about the bottom line is to experimentation? Well, okay, well, yeah, it uses examples like Microsoft Access or Microsoft Project, I think, is a really good one. You get these new databases, these new data sets. I mean, are you going to sit there and try them out? Or are you going to be stifled by your own fear? You're going to get locked up and not get anything accomplished. So to the degree that you start experimenting with the technology that you have is a very powerful thing, and it's something to not underestimate. And the fear of failure is one of the toughest things that's going to be lasting with the rest of our lives. But if you're the person that can get past your fears, that can have courage in those moments, that's going to separate you from the people that are going to be performing the routine skills. So what do all four of these things kind of do? It says here, it will give you the background you need to assess, evaluate, and apply emerging information systems technology to business. And number 2, it can give you the ultimate in job security, marketable skills by helping you learn abstraction, systems thinking, collaboration, and experimentation. So finally, that'll all come together, and it gets a lot deeper. There's a lot more frameworks to be thinking about. Obviously, some ways that it goes beyond this is ethical. Like some of the questions you're going to be asking yourself are going to be ethical in nature. Sometimes you're going to have win-lose situations where, you know, you're going to win and no one else and other people lose. And, you know, my personal recommendation would be to try to avoid all win-lose problems because there's so many win-win opportunities out there. But if you have to, then, you know, there's decision analysis and things that you can do for that. But I know that there's some ethical things with public speaking. When you start getting more and more confident and you start developing the ability to look outside yourself and you get more understanding of the way other people are thinking, because as a public speaker, you learn, like I was saying, listening is so powerful. You become better at listening and understanding the needs of other people. You kind of have a responsibility to add value to those people's needs and to not harm other people in a lot of ways, and to not use your skills for harm. Unless you're a comedian. And if you're a comedian, you can just say and do whatever you want and get paid for it. No, just kidding. So that was the 4 things. And let's see here. We're right at 46 minutes. I think that was really enough, to be honest. And I think I went deep enough and I stayed general enough about it. But this is just something that really hit me. And that was the first week of a graduate level course in a very comprehensive course on the management of information systems. And I think, you know, you might be able to think, or we all might be able to think about how that plays itself out, how all 4 of those components are interrelated, and how to add a little bit more wholeness so that when you're trying to maybe as you're developing yourself personally, you can think about those things. And to me, those 4 insights were the kinds of things, like, for months after, and still today, I think by now it's unconsciously in my brain. But I remember for months, just all of a sudden I was thinking, collaboration. This is a moment where I can collaborate with someone and get feedback, and critical feedback is so important. Systems, I was reading about some system. I was like, oh, system. And it just made my brain just pay a little bit more attention, because I was now aware. So I just paid a little bit more attention to that article that I was reading about some new systems technology. And it helped me understand how things are all interrelated. And then the abstract thinking through models, that has helped so much, because I was like, instead of, and I think in the business, especially in the business world, this helps so much. Instead of investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into an untested idea, for example, why would you do that when you can simply build a model or see what other people... That's why in business school case studies were always so important, because you look at the model. You know, a lot of people laugh because we often talked about, like, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, and just general things, but you gotta walk before you can run. You know, you gotta stand up before you can walk. So, like, by studying other models of things that failed in the past and what they did to overcome it, what did the survivors do? And there is a kind of a bias that I heard interesting. A scientist was talking about this recently, how we look at the successes of things and we correlate them kind of in a wrong way that creates a hole in our logic. And the example they used was like Wall Street. Like, well, if back in 1929, during the Great Depression, you'd invested this much, your money would have multiplied this many times over. But what the commenter fails to understand or realize is, if you had invested in all the successful businesses that survived, the survivors, yeah, but what you're not looking at is there was a shitload of failures out there. Yeah, pardon my French. This is a 18 and over podcast, so I like to cuss. I'm just going to, be myself. And this is more academic podcast, but yeah, so the survivor, I think it was called like the survivor effect or survivorism. Anyway, we look back on the past and we see all the success, but what we don't see is all those failures that happened. And that could be a potential hole in our own reasoning abilities. So again, like I drilled the shit out of these things like hardcore, but I was trying to think about what is some of the most valuable things, and it came back. It just kept coming back to me for whatever reason to these like 4 simple ideas from the former Secretary of Labor. So I would imagine that a guy whose job it is to understand where the labor market was going, he was at the top of his game in the 90s, and he came up with those 4 things. I would imagine there's some really important things even today that some important things to that. So I'm hoping, on another note, so in closing, we went over all these wonderful ways of maintaining job security and developing what Robert Reich called non-routine skills. So let's just keep thinking about how we can go into the darkness and add our own light. We can perhaps be non-routine with everything, because I know humans they say like most of our days are exactly the same as before, but what can we do? Like, what can you do this week? Can you do today? What kind of actions can you do based on maybe some of the things you learned today? That's usually how I think. So let's just try to think about if there's anything that you can do maybe to collaborate a little bit more with someone. And it might even be just something as simple as sending an email, receiving, giving and receiving feedback. But don't do it in a way like, I'm doing this thing because I heard this podcast now and I'm going to be, what you don't want to do is talk down to people, and you don't want to shake up their lives too much. But, shaking up their lives a little bit is okay. And just some updates on the podcast. I finished up this terrific logo now. So probably if you're watching this, you see a totally hooked artwork now in the podcast. That artwork is amazing. I could never have done that myself. You can find it's kind of like 99designs.com, but there was this other site that was recommended to me. I'll go ahead and give that site anyway. Fuck it. I don't like to be a shill for like companies and stuff. Obviously I'm not getting paid for this. It's Fiverr, Fiverr, and it was only $5. I paid $5.50, and there's a professional designer in Indonesia, so I outsourced it, and I basically said, I want, in really large letters, fun type that says totally hooked, totally on the top, hooked on the bottom, and it's for my podcast, so I need it 1400 by 1400, and I gave a bunch of descriptions and stuff like that. And within a day or two, I get an email back, and this person made something that I just could never have designed on my own. And I'll be honest, for $5, that's one of the most valuable things. So now my podcast just looks so much more professional on the iTunes. And my goal is going to be to attract a lot of people, hopefully in the new and noteworthy section. So that's why I'm pushing out so many episodes as fast as I can, so I can develop more audience members. And I want to also conclude, like, I think I've said this before, but this is an independent podcast. It's really important that, like, I'm trying to add the maximum amount of value I can to my listeners' lives and to everyone's around it. And, I'm not the type usually to promote things. Like, if I listen to a podcast, it takes a lot for me to promote someone else's stuff. But, if you got something valuable out of this podcast, please just, subscribe. Well, I don't want to beg, but please just subscribe on iTunes, subscribe to the Totally Hooked podcast. If I get a good enough following, I'm going to be creating I want to be consistent, and week after week, just provide people the very best stuff that they possibly can. And this is an independent podcast brought to you by Frank Howard, a guy. I just live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I think for years I've just had a lot of things that I want to add value in, not just in business, in philosophy and lifestyle. And I've spent my whole life, since I was like 14 or 15, studying self-help, academics, and it's all I'm at this pivotal point, I think, where all that knowledge that I soaked in, all that reading I did, it's all starting to unconsciously hit me in a way I can talk about it with confidence and maybe help other people. And that's just the goal here. So please just subscribe on to iTunes. Come out the web by now. If you're listening to this, the website is up, totallyhooked.net. Check it out. Sign up for the email list. I'm just going to go ahead and say, I haven't developed the email list yet, but I'm just going to assume that I have an email list out there. So please sign up for the email list. I guarantee you I won't be spamming too. I'm not going to, that I might or might not use it to, at most, I could think maybe once a month or once every week or 2 weeks, depending on the feedback I get and the responses I get from people. I would never shoot out an email more than once a week. I just don't like it. I don't like getting that shit from other people. So I would only send out really important emails. So, subscribe to the podcast and that'll just update itself. So as more podcasts come, but I'm really trying to get a lot of podcasts in now. And this shit, now we're going, 10 minutes ago we were talking about a lot of stuff, and now it's good. We take a relax. This is like a break. We did 45 minutes of academic, learning, and maybe you're working out or driving home and you got something out of this. But I really do, from the bottom of my heart, hope that this helped you. And I hope that it's helping other people. And I hope everybody has a great day, a great week, and look forward to hearing you on the next podcast. All right, bye.